Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where today Roger and I are going to be talking movies once again. Now, this is a channel where we talk about books, but there are a few occasions where we'll talk about films. And today we're talking about movies because Grammaticus, the great Grammaticus over at his channel, and Steve Donoghue over on his channel, they're both going to be talking about movies again today, like they like to do. And today's subject, I think their videos are going up today. I hope so. Today's subject from Grammaticus and Steve Donoghue is the top 10 greatest historical films of all time. The 10 greatest historical movies of all time. So historical movies. Now, Grammaticus got a hold of me and emailed me and said, hey, Steve and I are doing this. You want to join along like you did last time? The last time we did one of these type of lists? And usually I'll go along with it and I'll talk about how bad Grammaticus's list is and how much worse Steve Donoghue's list is, because Steve Donoghue's list is always the worst. But not today. Today is going to be a little different because I really like historical movies. I just tend not to like good ones. Now, a lot of the historical movies I watch are just, and the ones I really like, they tend to not be the best. They tend not to be the best. I have to admit. Roger especially hates my taste in historical films. He's always talking about how historically inaccurate they all are because he actually lived through many of the events depicted or supposed to be depicted in these movies. I understand. The historical accuracy is not something you're going to find in, well, any of the movies I'm going to be talking about today. Because I am going to be going on a different track than Grammaticus and Steve Donoghue. I'm not going to try to say that this list is the greatest list of all time, of the greatest list of historical films. No, this is not the 10 greatest historical films of all time. They're not the greatest. They're not the worst. This first one on the list might be the worst. Okay, I'm going to go from 10 to 1 for this magnificent list of great films. So, number 10 in my list of not the greatest historical films of all time that I like anyway is Caligula. It's Caligula. I couldn't even make a list like this if I didn't put Caligula on it. So, this cinematic masterpiece was released in 1979. And the director, there's three directors in this movie's so bad it has three directors. So these are the directors listed in this film. I'm not sure what exactly happened in the making of this film, but if you watch the movie, something crazy happened. So we've got Tinto Brass, Bob Guccione, and Giancarlo Louis. So those are the directors that I can't speak. So those are the directors for Caligula. Now, if you've never seen Caligula, well, that's probably a good thing. I don't know why I like this movie. There's something fascinating about it. It's kind of like, have you ever gone to one of those parties and there's some really weird and strange things going on that are bordering on criminal, and the kind of parties where you just might catch something just from being in the vicinity. You ever been to one of those? You know how it's sort of fascinating and repulsive at the same time? Well, that's Caligula. It's kind of like that, only worse. So, it's just a weird film, man. It's full of, X-rated sex and outrageous violence and just over-the-top melodrama and just bad. It's not a great movie. And yet, I kind of like it. I do. I don't know what that says about me. but there's something about this movie I like, and I'm not. It's an awful film. But let's move on to number 9. So this movie, even I am kind of embarrassed to admit that I like this movie. This is not a great movie. This is 300 Rise of Empire from 2014. So this was the sequel, obviously, to 300. This is the sequel that you probably don't remember. There's a reason it's not that memorable. But, I kind of like this movie. I should hate it. I should hate this movie for many, many. There are so many reasons to hate this movie. First of all, my favorite book of all time is The Histories by Herodotus, which this sort of just craps all over by being so bad and terribly historically inaccurate. This movie is not great. So this movie is so bad that it's not even Zack Snyder bad. It's imitation Zack Snyder bad. It's directed by, who directed this movie? Noam Murrow. I don't know who he is either. But he directed this movie, and this movie is not, it's not good, but it's kind of fun. I kind of like it. I don't know what that, I don't know why. I have no idea, but I do kind of like it. And speaking of the 300 Spartans, no, it's not that other Spartan movie. This is the 300 Spartans from 1962, directed by Rudolph Maté. So I saw this movie when I was a kid on television, and I thought it was just magnificent. If you watch it now, if you're an adult watching it, it doesn't seem that magnificent. In fact, the battle scenes are kind of ridiculous. They're usually just a bunch of people running around, and this is no cinematic masterpiece. But even today, I have to admit I enjoy this movie. It's the first time I ever encountered the subject matter. Again, the 300 Spartans from Herodotus. The first time I ever encountered this story of the 300 Spartans was in this magnificent film. And I probably like it just because of that. It is kind of entertaining. It in its own, silly 1962 way. So that was that. Moving on, you're probably going to notice a theme to these movies. There are certain kinds of movies I like when it comes to this sort of thing. King Arthur from 2004, directed by Antoine Fuqua. This is not the worst King Arthur movie. It's not. There are worse King Arthur movies than this. I can't think of any. No, actually, there was one a few years ago, and I think it might have. Was that one just called King Arthur also? That one was even worse than this. So this movie, I remember when this movie came out, it claimed to present the untold true story of King Arthur. It doesn't. This movie is full of nonsense, but it's fun nonsense. It's not good. This is not a good movie, but it's entertaining and fun. And if it would come on television, I would watch it despite it being so bad. So that's that. Number 6. Oh God, number 6. Number 6. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves from 1991. I would say that this isn't the worst Robin Hood movie ever made, but it could be the worst Robin Hood movie ever made. Is there a worse Robin Hood movie than Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves? If there is, put it down in the comments, because I find it hard to believe. But this is Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves from 1991. And even back in 1991, everybody was like, Kevin Costner is Robin Hood? What? Kevin Costner is a terrible Robin Hood. I don't know what accent he's even trying to use in this movie. He doesn't do an English accent, but it's just, I don't know what he's trying to do. But it's bizarre, man. This is a bizarre movie, and it's really, really, frankly, it's frankly a pretty crap movie. But, you know, the villain was good and it was fun. You know, we had those things going for it. This movie is kind of fun despite it being, well, despite it being Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. I like it. I like it. What can I say? Okay, this next movie is a genuine Hollywood classic. Sure it is. It's Cleopatra from 1963. This is the Cleopatra movie. This is Cleopatra, directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz. Joseph L. Mankiewicz directed this movie. Okay, this movie is not great. I don't know how many of you people have actually seen this movie, but there are worse Cleopatra movies than this. This is true. I know that for a fact. This is not the worst Cleopatra movie, but it's not the best movie in the world. It's got its issues, this film, and yet I've always liked it. I've always liked it. And again, I like this better than I like a lot of good movies, you know. There are good historical movies, and if they come on and this comes on, I will watch this. So that's Cleopatra. And this next one is fantastic. This next one is The Vikings. This is The Vikings from 1958, directed by Richard Fleischer. Richard Fleischer. The Vikings. So Kirk Douglas and Tony Curtis, they made this really great movie, which I really love, called Spartacus. Spartacus was a great movie. It was Kirk Douglas was awesome in Spartacus. And Tony Curtis was awesome in Spartacus. I loved you like you was my own father, Spartacus. It was great. Tony Curtis, man, he was so good in that movie. They decided to bring him back to make another movie with Kirk Douglas, and they made The Vikings, where Kirk Douglas plays this crazed, evil Viking, and Tony Curtis plays Tony Curtis like he always does. It's a lot. I enjoy this movie. It's fun. This is a fun Viking movie. It's also crap, but I enjoy it. It's not a great movie, but you know, again, one of those movies that if it were ever to come on television, I don't know if it ever would, but if I were to turn on a television, which is kind of a rare occurrence nowadays, but if I would turn on a television and this movie were just playing, I would sit down and watch it. I would. I like The Vikings. I don't care what you all say. Okay, we're at number 3 now. I haven't been counting down. I'm terrible at this whole making videos thing. Okay, number 3 on my list. Troy from 2004. It's Troy from 2004. Directed by Wolfgang Peterson. Admit it, you like this movie too. No, you're just claiming you don't like it. You like this movie. People say they don't like this movie, but everybody does. It's Troy. It tells the story of Homer's The Iliad. It's not accurate in any way, and it's not historically accurate to the period, obviously, if you look at the armor and everything, but who cares? It's an awful lot of fun. This is an awful lot of fun, full of action and drama and, a giant wooden horse and all that stuff you want from a movie based on the Iliad.
The wooden horse wasn't even in the Iliad, dumbass.
This is probably the best movie based on the Iliad that I can think of. I can't think of any others that are better than this. In fact, I can't think of any others. There's got to be more, though. But I like this one. I like Troy, and I don't care what you think about the fact that I like it. Okay, this next movie the next movie on the list might be the greatest movie on this list, which I know isn't really saying much. This next movie I dearly love, and it is Fall of the Roman Empire from 1964, directed by Anthony Mann. So this epic historical film, was the film that pretty much ended epic historical films, because it didn't do well, I don't think this movie did. And yeah, I think this kind of ended historical epics for a while, despite it being awesome. this movie's awesome. I remember my brother and I were watching television, and we were both in our early 20s. Had to be I was probably around 20, 19 or 20. And so he was, 22 or something like that, around there. And we were flipping through the channels and we came across this movie, and we were both like, this movie is amazing. Neither one of us, I don't think, had ever heard of this movie before, but we loved it. It was just, what an amazing discovery, because we had never heard of this movie, and it was fantastic. Loved this movie. And then, years later, I went to see a movie called Gladiator. And I was sitting in the theater watching Gladiator, and I was like, wait a minute. This is a remake of Fall of the Roman Empire. It's so similar in plot, particularly in the early portion of the film Gladiator, that it seems like it's a remake of Fall of the Roman Empire. I mean, they're both basically, in a lot of ways, the same movie. But I literally thought it was a remake, but apparently it's not. And they do diverge pretty drastically, but at a certain point. But they're so eerily similar, those two films. I know Gladiator is the better movie, but I like Fall of the Roman Empire. It's great. Okay, so my number one movie. We should just get to my number one movie of my list of not the greatest historical movies ever made that I like anyway. This movie is, I could watch this movie like over and over again. It's possible that I have watched this movie over and over again. It's a classic of cinema. It's 2010's Centurion. Centurion, directed by that great director, Neil Marshall. Neil Marshall, who did a couple of my favorite movies. He did Dog Soldiers. He did The Descent. He also did that last Hellboy movie, but let's not blame him for that. And I think he worked on Game of Thrones, I think. Anyway, he made this badass movie, History is Written in Blood. It's Centurion, about, a Roman army that gets cut to pieces by Picts. And, there are only a few survivors, including the badass Centurion, and they must survive while being hunted down by Picts. It's basically a Western, and I really like Westerns. It's basically a Western, only it's set in ancient times, and it's full of unnecessarily gory violence. It's awesome. I love this movie. It's Centurion, and it is probably my favorite historical movie of all time. It's not a great movie. I make no claims to the greatness of any of these films, just that I like them. Again, I don't know what that says about me, but I like them. And that's all I have to say today. I will catch you next time.